الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا إنا خلقنا الإنسان من نطفة أمشاج نبتليه فجعلناه سميعا بصيرا إنا هديناه السبيل إما شاكرا وإما كفورا إنا أعطينا للكافرين سلاسل وأغلالا وسعيرا إن الأبرار يشربون من كأس كان مزاجها كافورا عينا يشرب بها عباد الله عينا يشرب بها عباد الله يفجرونها تفجيرا إن الأبرار يشربون من كأس كان مزاجها كافورا عينا يشرب بها عباد الله يفجرونها تفجيرا يوفون بالنذر ويخافون يوما كان شره مستطيرا يوفون بالنذر ويخافون يوما كان شره مستطيرا ويطعمون الطعام على حبه مسكينا ويتيما وأسيرا ويطعمون الطعام على حبه مسكينا ويتيما وأسيرا ويطعمون الطعام على حبه مسكينا ويتيما وأسيرا إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا. إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا إنا نخاف من ربنا يوما عبوسا قمطريرا. فوقاهم الله شر ذلك اليوم ولقاهم نظرة وسرورا. فوقاهم الله شر ذلك اليوم ولقاهم نظرة وسرورا وجزاهم بما صبروا جنة وحريرا. وجزاهم بما صبروا جنة وحريرا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. وعجل لوليك الفرج. صلوات.
درود محمد صلی الله علیه و खून बरसा खून बरसा ना बरसना था ना बादल बरसे एक एक खतरे को पानी के शहीदी तरसे खून बरसा ना बरसना था ना बादल बरसे प्यास जब हाथ से बढ़ी रोके सकीना ने कहा प्यास जब हाथ से बढ़ी रोके, सकीना ने कहा दूर कितनी है चचा नहर, बताओ घर से। खून बरसा, खून बरसा, ना बरसना था ना बादल बरसे। अब कहाँ खाक पे बैठी हो सकीना, उठो। अब कहाँ खाक पे बैठी हो सकीना, उठो। कौन आया है पलट कर जो गया रन घर से। खून बरसा, खून बरसा, न बरसना था न बादल बरसे। घुड़कियाँ शेमर की खाई जो, किया बाप को याद। घुड़कियाँ शेमर की खाई जो, किया बाप को याद। कान के दर्द से रोई तो तमाचे बरसे। खून बरसा, खून बरसा, न बरसना था न बादल बरसे। दुरूद मोहम्मद वाला मोहम्मद।
محمد والے محمد غم سکینہ کو ملے اتنے مسلمانوں سے، غم سکینہ کو ملے اتنے مسلمانوں سے، مر گئی پر نہ کبھی، مر گئی پر نہ کبھی ہاتھ ہٹے کانوں سے ہے، غم سکینہ کو ملے اتنے مسلمانوں سے۔ شام جاتے ہوئے ناقے سے گری یوں بچی، شام جاتے ہوئے ناقے سے گری یوں بچی، مشک غازی کی گری جیسے کٹے شانوں سے ہے، غم سکینہ کو ملے اتنے مسلمانوں سے۔ چونک اٹھتی تھی مدینے میں یہ کہہ کر بانو، چونک اٹھتی تھی مدینے میں یہ کہہ کر بانو، کوئی آواز مجھے دیتا ہے ویرانوں سے ہے، غم سکینہ کو ملے اتنے مسلمانوں سے. کتنی بے دردی سے ظالم نے اتارے وہ گوہر، کتنی بے دردی سے ظالم نے اتارے وہ گوہر. شہ نے بیٹی کو جو پہنائے تھے ارمانوں سے ہے، غم سکینہ کو ملے اتنے مسلمانوں سے. مجھ کو کڑتے میں ہی دفنانا سکینہ نے کہا، مجھ کو کڑتے میں ہی دفنانا سکینہ نے کہا. مت کفن مانگنا ہے بھائی مسلمانوں سے ہے، غم سکینہ کو ملے اتنے مسلمانوں سے. کوئی غیبت میں انہیں دیکھ کہ خون روتا ہے، کوئی غیبت میں انہیں دیکھ کہ خون روتا ہے. رشتہ رہتا ہے لہو آج بھی جن کانوں سے ہے، غم سکینہ کو ملے اتنے مسلمانوں سے. سب چلے جاتے ہیں شبیر کو رو کر اکبر، سب چلے جاتے ہیں شبیر کو رو کر اکبر. ایک بچی نہیں جاتی ہے عزا خانوں سے ہے، غم سکینہ کو ملے اتنے مسلمانوں سے. مر گئی پر نہ کبھی، مر گئی پر نہ کبھی ہاتھ ہٹے کانوں سے ہے، غم سکینہ کو ملے اتنے مسلمانوں سے. صلوات.
Assalamu alaikum. We are starting Arbaeen program at this center, Razavi Community Center, this evening. This is a 5-day program. Inshallah, will continue until Arbaeen Day, which is on Sunday. For the next 2 days, like today, we'll start 7 o'clock with the Quran recitation, followed by Marsiyas, and then, inshallah, we have a visiting speaker, Dr. Sayyid Shabir Girmani. I'll request Maulana Muhammad Bhai in a minute to come and give his bio to understand. Thanks for coming all the way from US, and inshallah he'll be reciting all the 5 days at this center. For Saturday, we do Fajr Salat Jamaat in the morning, if you can join us, and also we'll have a youth session after the main program on Saturday. So that will be after the Isha Salat. We'll have a youth interactive Q&A session with Dr. Sayyid Kirmani, inshallah. Arbaeen is on Sunday. We'll do the program with Zohar Salat, and I'll be giving more details. Newswire has already gone, and we do have the flyer also. So I'll be announcing and reminding, inshallah, as we come close to the Arbaeen. It will be on Sunday. We'll start with Zohar Salat, followed by the main program, and ending with the full niyaz, inshallah, on Arbaeen Day. Ramadan donation, we are still short of the target we have. If you can donate towards the Muharram fund, just contact anyone in the management. And also for the recitation for Marhumeen, the people who are sponsored tonight, Tabarruk, for them and all these people that we remember throughout the year, Marhumeen of Ghulam Hussain Mauladina family, Ghulam Hussain Khaki family, Musa Virji family, Ahmad Nanji Karak family, Ramzan Ali Manik, Leela Bhai Manik, Amir Bhai Sundar Ji, Hassan Rahim, Yusuf Ali Ghulam Hussain Maulidina, Marhum Inayat Ali Manik, Marhum Nazir Ghulam Hussain, Marhum Fida Ghulam Hussain, Marhuma Amina Bai Jibrij. All these people, all are Marhumin who have contributed, recited, attended these majalis, and served the cause of Ahlul Bayt anywhere in the world. For all Marhumin, Mu'mineen and Mu'minat, Muslimin and Muslimat. Al-Fatiha. I'll request Muhammad Bhai Mauludina to come and explain or brief us about the Maulana, and followed by the Majlis, inshallah. But Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
Respected Dr. Syed Shabir Kirmani, and my respected elders and brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. I want to welcome Dr. Syed Shabir Kirmani, who's from Florida. Welcome to our center. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And thank you. I know it's kind of hard to be away from a young family, but thank you for taking the time out to come here. Just a little bit about Dr. Syed Shabir Kirmani. He's a poet, researcher, and lecturer in the American Muslim community, an engineer by training. Dr. Kirmani has a diverse professional background working with Fortune 500 companies. As a lecturer, he has traveled throughout North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. He has been an active speaker in multiple conferences and seminars in the US, Canada, UK, and India on topics as diverse as Islam and economics, modernity, and development. His lectures both the English and Urdu languages. He was co-founder of the Ahlul Bayt Society at UCF and served as president and vice president of the society. Born and raised in Maryland, US, Syed is passionate about Islam in America, particularly the present and future of the American Muslim community, and works to bridge the gap between modernity and religion. He completed his bachelor's degree in economics, mathematics, computer science, his master's in engineering, and his PhD in 2021. He has been and continues to pursue his studies at the Imam Sadiq Seminary and the International Islamic School of Theology. Syed enjoys good books, thought-provoking discussions, volunteering, and traveling. Dr. Kirmani currently serves as the resident scholar at Masjid Al-Hay in Orlando, Florida. Once again, his bio is really good, and thank you once again for coming. And with the loudest salawat, I'll ask him to please come on up and start the lecture. Thank you.
فاتحة بسم الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أفوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. My respected brothers and sisters, elders in Islam and Iman here in Canada or wherever you may be hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what is the future of our community? There's a moment in time that we're told that after the tragedy of Karbala, there's a moment in time accepted by Mufassirin and Muhaddithin, those people who narrate a hadith from the Shia and Sunni school of thought, from the broader Muslim school of thought, that there's a moment that is very difficult to deny, if not impossible, which is that after the tragedy of Karbala, there's a moment where Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam's blessed head is reciting the verse of the Quran from the spear. Now, this is a moment where he's reciting something, some verse of the Quran. And it's important for us to note what's being mentioned here and what people have documented, number one. Number two, when it comes to this dynamic, this is one era and one scene in history. Another moment, if you will, come with me during the time of our sixth Imam. We're told there's a point in time where a man comes and he says, Yabna Rasulillah, can you please explain to me and tell me what are the ma'asi al-kabira, gunah al-kabira, the major sins? To which one may think that the Imam would respond with a long list of very long details and very sizable list. To which the Imam responds, there are just a few here. And he begins to say, write them down, note them down. And he says, number one, the first one is to commit shirk, to associate anyone with Allah. Now, please bear that point in mind, because in the next few nights we're going to elaborate on this. And it doesn't necessarily just mean an idol. An idol can be physical, an idol can be non-physical. It can be material, immaterial. And that's going to be something we're going to harp on. So the first is shirk. Number two is to kill any innocent person. Any innocent person, you kill anyone, as the Quran clearly says, if you kill one innocent person, it's as if you've killed all of humanity. If you save one innocent person, it's as if you've saved all of humanity. Islam does not have any tolerance for killing of innocent human life. It's something that's sacred, number two. Number three is to run away from the battlefield of the struggle. That is, if it's been ordained by the Prophet or someone in that category, to run away is something that's there. Number four, he says, is to accuse an innocent woman of indecency. As in, the Quran also alludes to this, that they did on Maryam buhtanan azima, that they did a slander. As you know, there's two things. One is ghiba. Ghiba is, for example, backbiting, which is gossiping, perhaps, even if it may be true, you're saying something you shouldn't be saying. But slander or buhtan is worse. And that's when you make up something that's not even true and then you spread that about someone. So that's what had happened, they did to Maryam alayha salam. So that's a major sin in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Further than this, they said, what else? He says, another one is to disrespect one's parents. You know, the parents, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, it's a very interesting how Allah approaches some of these topics and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we'll try to elaborate on this in the next few nights, about how Allah has shown glimpses of His sifat, His attributes, His mercy, His compassion for others. How has He shown it? By virtue of creations that He's created for us. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, at this level, He tells us something. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us in the Quran? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I have decreed that you do not worship anyone except me. Allah says very, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Allah says. In this ayah, Allah says, وَقَضَى, your Lord has decreed, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ, that you do not associate anyone with Him. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, and do good to your parents. Not good. Ihsan is a word that you need to write down in your glossary, because we're going to use it again and again in the next few nights, and we're going to try to translate it appropriately. Ihsan, good in English, is not a sufficient translation for ihsan. Anyways, so now, why did Allah say this? One of the things the Mufassirin say about this is the reason Allah said this, it seems that the style, the tonality, the approach of this is something that is interesting to note. In the Urdu language, they'll say tevar, ayat ke tevar ajeeb hai. Why? Because the way that Allah is dialing, He's saying, don't associate anyone with me. But it seems as if Allah, then He says, don't do ihsan to your parents. It's as if Allah is saying, as if If I were allow you to worship anyone but me, it would be your parents. If. So Allah is saying that my rahmah, you see a glimpse of my rahmah in your parents in some sense. So he says, number 5, don't disrespect your parents, major sin in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 6, to commit adultery, which there are verses in Surah Yusuf and other examples that you can find within the Quran. And they says, anything else you have Rasul? They say, yes, there's one more. By the way, at the beginning of this narration, the Imam is attributed to have said that there are 6. And he said, anything else? He said, yes, there's one more. It's called Ta'arrub Ba'd al-Hijrah. So he wrote it down. He said, Ta'arrub Ba'd al-Hijrah, what's that? And now keep that on ice. We'll elaborate on this tonight, tomorrow, and the next few nights, and how this relates to our conversation here. So this person wrote it down and he counted all of those and he said, I came to 7. But Yabna Rasulullah, I know that you don't make mistakes. There's a reason as to why you say things and a purpose. He said, you said at the beginning there'll be 6. I counted 7. It's a good observation. He said the reality is number 1 and number 7. Shirk and Ta'arrub Ba'd al-Hijrah are one and the same. So, in the next few nights, we'll have to unpack this. What was the Quranic recitation by Imam al-Hussein on this bier? Number 2, what is this concept of Ta'arrub Ba'd al-Hijrah? And number 3, the element of which I really want to discuss, which is the topic of interest for our next few nights, which is, what is the future of our community? What does it look like based on observations of the past, based on observations in other countries, based on observations in this country, in the neighboring countries? What is the observation of what's happened over the years? Has there been change? What are the changes? What can we learn from other communities that may have come here before? The next element that we're going to try to look at is, why did Allah create us? Is there a purpose as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us? And if there's a purpose as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, what is that purpose? The next element is, what does this purpose have to do with the movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam? How can I look at the movement of Karbala, the movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, in order to understand why Allah created me and why I'm here in this zaman and makan, this time and space? What does it have to do with me? And the next element of what we'll try to unpack, not just tonight, in the next few nights, is to try to understand how we can live Karbala in this day and age, how we can live Islam and not just make it a religion for the akhirah. That is, if someone dies, I pick up the Quran, I recite Fatiha, I recite Yasin, and then when it's this religion of life, how can I actually live it as a religion of life as opposed to a religion of death? And finally, how is it that if we understand Karbala in this light, perhaps we won't have anything to worry about, and perhaps we will find our guiding light in this time and space and in every time and space. But for that, inshallah, I implore your attention, and inshallah, I'm committed to you and your understanding this, as well as I'm committed to learning from you, inshallah, as well. How can we navigate these terrains of culture and religion, these topics and discussions that we're facing? How can we navigate the difficulties of what may come down the pipeline, which we're not even aware of right now, and what are those things that we can give the tools to this generation, the next generation, and the future generations, that they can thrive in this time and in the future? That's our agenda for the next few nights, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So our topic is the future of our community, Islam in the 21st century, the Husseini movement, the eternal renaissance of the Husseini movement. That is, how does the movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam in every time, in every space, in every zaman, in every makan, help awaken and revive my heart and my soul to be able to practice and live the religion? This is vital because of a few reasons. One is, many people are asking in our broader society, well, what's the point of religion? Why do I need religion today? Maybe there was a time where I needed religion, but maybe today I don't. So we need to have answers to these. We also need to understand the zaman and makan, the time and space, and we're existing because the time and space sometimes necessitates different approaches. So for this, I need to give you some background. And that background will be some of my perspective, but in my perspective and my story, there's a story and many stories beyond it. So come with me on this journey. So the year is 1946. My grandfather he leaves India at the time. There was no partition that had happened. And so he leaves from India and he comes to the United States. He lands in New York. And when he lands in New York, he's going to school. He's trying to get his education. And he takes a Greyhound bus on his way to Ithaca, New York, where there's Cornell University, where he's going to study for architecture to get his graduate studies. And when they stop on the way to this destination, they stop at a rest stop. At the rest stop, he has this first awakening of the duality of America and the duality of the West, one may say. That is, you hear one thing, the reality may be different. In some areas, great, some areas not so great. Some areas, all societies have these dualities and pluralities. So a man, an African American man, comes up to him and he says, "Can you help me out?" He said, "What do you need?" He said, Can you buy me a sandwich?" Yeah, okay, sure. But sure, but why is that? He said, "The reason is, you see that sign over there?" He said, "What's the sign?" He looks at the sign, and the sign says at the rest stop, "No dogs or blacks allowed." And in that situation, he realized that this is a very different world that he's come to, 1946 America. And so when he comes in this environment, he notices this. He does his education, finishes his education, partition happens, and he goes to what's newly formed Pakistan, and he gets a job there. Rest is history. My uncles come back in the 60s, my dad comes back in the 70s, and that's one generation. If you go before that, you'll find that in history documents that you may have heard of the Titanic, the ship. The Titanic, was that just someone else's problem? We know that there were at least 3 documented Shia sisters on the Titanic who died on the Titanic. They were coming from the Middle East, from Lebanon in particular, or at that time it was called Levant, towards America. There were many people there at that time. Why am I saying that? One question that I'll be harping on today and tomorrow and the next day is, what are the lessons, if any, that we have learned from those generations of followers of Ahlul Bayt that came to this part of the land before? Not in the 90s, not in the 2000s, but not even in the 80s, 70s, 60s. I'm hearing that you guys are hitting 50-year mark. There are people who were here even before that. Were there any lessons captured? And that's something that's really important. And I'm going to have a sober conversation here, but I'm not going to leave you without hope, because hopelessness is is Islamically unacceptable. I want to get a concept of a community dialogue started, so we start to figure out with our brain power what is the success that we can actually establish for the new generation in terms of how do we solve these problems. So come with me on this journey, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Part 2 of my story. Again, in my story is another set of stories. So I was born in DC, in Washington, and I grew up in an environment where we're growing and we're doing matam, we're doing aza, and I'm a big proponent of it. And we're going to juluses in New York, in DC itself, in New Jersey. We're very, very active. And in that environment, eventually what happens is life takes you on these journeys, and sometimes you don't know at that moment that life is teaching you a lesson. You learn later. So then eventually, life takes us here, life takes us there. So I'm growing up in an environment where my parents were very adamant about us speaking Urdu at home, for example. And alhamdulillah, we learned it. We learned it as a combination from our parents, Majlis, and interest, to be honest with you, for my case. But for every one of me who knew it, there was a dozen or 2 who didn't know it, number one. So I was in an environment where I was listening to Majalis growing up in the 90s and the 2000s, where the Majalis, for me, understanding it was amazing. But if my friend, my colleague, my classmate, my cousin, someone who didn't understand the language or the substance, they were dead in the water. And in that environment, I had to take a stand and understand that, look, what got us here may not get us there. Meaning what? I'll give you another example. So my family, from both sides, are Sadat, who trace their lineage back to the Ahlul Bayt, right? Many of you are like this here, for example, right? So, I had a rude awakening when I was young, and I didn't know that the Ahlul Bayt didn't speak Urdu at home. I thought they all spoke Urdu at home. And the reality of the matter is, by the way, they spoke many languages. They knew many languages, and we have traditions about this. But what I'm saying is, if you stay with me at a moment, this aza and this commemoration, at once it began in a language where many people spoke Arabic, for example. And you'll know, if you know the riwayat, up until the time of the 7th Imam, there was a certain fragrance that used to come from the Sadat. That the 7th Imam himself, Imam al-Kazim, did dua that it's removed, because people were identifying Sadat based on that. You know, in the history of Baghdad, in the history of Islam, in the history of the Arab world, in the history of Baghdad, there was a time where they would not do a groundbreaking ceremony of a land until and unless they drained the blood of a Sayyid Hassani in the cement. As in, you know, you use water and cement, right, to build structures. They would drain blood of Sadat in order to build these constructions. They would sometimes take Sadat, who were family and progeny of Rasulullah, they would enclose them alive between the two walls and they would suffocate to death. I say this to allow you to understand through what price Islam and Tashayyu has reached you and I. It's not been a very easy road, to say the least. But in this, you find that there's a dynamic of this love of Sayyid al-Shuhada that gives you and I this love and this compassion and this passion for the Ahlul Bayt that is something you can't put a price on. So stay with me here. So this is now the second phase of understanding, did we lose people? And if you ask honestly, those people who came to America, who came to London, I spent 6 months in London, I lectured there, met the community, I have a decent idea of the community there, and they'll tell you the same thing. Those people who came, for example, in Hammersmith in the 60s, and those people who came in the 70s, those people who came a long time ago, they'll tell you that for every one child or one member of the community who kept coming, we lost a lot of people who didn't. And I know my generation, we lost at least 2 to 3 generations. Why? Because we may not have adapted. So now, coming back to this. First generation Arab speaking, but my last name is Kirmani, right? Many of you may have Isfahani or this or that and all of these other names, right? Razavi and these likes. Razavi Sayyids, but also other things. Anyways, coming to other things meaning Razavi Sayyid, and then sometimes people from that dynamics, Razavi, Razvi, it becomes a Persian dialect thing. The point that I'm driving at here is, when that Aza went from the Arab belt to the Persian belt, my ancestors, some of your ancestors, they spoke Arabic, and it probably wasn't the easiest thing for them to transition to Farsi, but they did. But as a result of that, sometimes some of the most beautiful poetry, commemorations in terms of Ahlul Bayt emerged from that. Another one, it doesn't stop there. Then people had to migrate. You know, this Shia world, the Persian belt only became Shia predominantly in the last 400 years under the Safavid dynasty. Before that, it was predominantly Sunni. Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, all of these scholars from the Sunni world were Ghazali, they were all Persian, Sunnis. So then eventually they had to migrate, and they migrated towards, for example, Hind or India, modern day India. I'm talking about the greater Indian subcontinent, which was Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and all of this region. And at that point in time, when they migrated, they adapted. If you know the history of India, you'll know up to 100 years ago, the judicial language in parts of India was still Farsi. In the legislative language, they still used it. Eventually, the circumstances emerged where people built up in the last 150 years on the Urdu language in substance. Yes, the roots of Urdu are much older. Why am I saying this to you? In our world, in our time, in our space, we need to understand the dynamics of our audience. And sometimes it doesn't mean that we have to change everything. It doesn't mean we have to change anything. It just means we have to understand the space. What I understood and what my colleagues understood and what necessitated this was the understanding that what was going on in our society was not adapting to what was needed. So now when it comes to the future of our communities, why am I saying this? When you read the Quran, when you read the Hadith, when you read the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt, when you read some of the Islamic thinkers, philosophers, poets, you will find some of the most beautiful answers to some of the biggest questions today. But unfortunately, sometimes those haven't been shared with you and I. So I went on a journey to try to find out why. A couple of years, this is the third part of my story, which I'm sharing with you to give you some perspective in the next few nights. So when I'm saying something to you, it will make sense if you understand the background. So a couple of years ago, I went to India. And when I went to, it was for some philanthropy projects with some team. So when I went to India, I went to different places, Bombay or Mumbai, Bhavnagar, I went to Lucknow, I went to Hyderabad, I went to Bangalore, I went all over. And I asked a question. And one of the things that's quite interesting, one of our esteemed scholars, if you go to Najaf, if you go to some of these cemeteries where some of our esteemed scholars have lived, our Maraji, our scholars, you'll find that some of them had, in fact, many of them historically had a grounding in the Indian subcontinent. In fact, you'll find that some, and I'm not saying there's a superiority or inferiority, I'm just trying to state the facts so we understand how times may have changed. And so even Ayatollah Khomeini rahmatullah alayhi, when he said one of the things that the Shah said to him, I was told by the Iranian community when I lectured there, was that one of his objections was, I don't talk to non-Persians about Persian matters. And he was alluding to something which, if you look at the scholar, if you look at his grandfather, his last name was Musavi al-Hindi, because they were from Kashmir. And so the idea was that every other scholar in the history of Tashayyu, not every other, maybe every third or fourth, had Hindavi in their name. So that ground used to produce top-notch scholars 100, 200, 300 years ago. But the question is, what happened? It's a good question. So I asked this question when I went to India. And I got one response from everybody. And the response that they gave was that there was a notion that in the past, we sometimes sent our brightest minds to become scholars. But what ended up happening in the 20th century and bleeding into the 21st century was, if you could become a doctor or a lawyer or engineer, I should say, moreover, then you went into that field. And if you couldn't, you ended up going into becoming the Maulana field. So what did that lead to? Not all, of course there's exceptions, but what that led to was an environment where we weren't sending our best minds to become scholars. And what that led to was, as the caliber of intellect of our audience increased, the intellectual capacity that was coming from the mimbar was not increasing. And so that left a gap, a delta. And when that delta was left, that delta over time compounds. Any of you in finance or economics? Compounding. That delta compounds. When that difference compounds over time, eventually it leads to an environment where people said, Mom, Dad, I have enough of this. I can't do this. Fourth story from my friends and my age group. Everywhere I go, from across America to the UK or Canada or wherever, people loving, caring, compassionate parents will come up to me and they'll say, Sayyid, talk to my kid. I say, what? Tell them to come to Imam Barga. Tell them to come to Husseiniya. Tell them to come. I said, what's wrong? He said, they're not coming. I said, what happened? I said, what's the story? He said, well, I told them, go and when they were high school, when middle school they used to come, high school, end of high school, last couple of years they stopped coming. They slowed it down because they had exams. So we told them, focus on the exams, you can come back later. Then they went for 4 years undergrad. They studied 4 years undergrad, got their bachelor. We said, come back when you're done studying. Then they went to med school 4 more years. And then we said, don't finish your studies, come back. Then they did residency 3 years at least, if not 5 years, depends on the residency. Then they did that. And then eventually after that, after they did 4 plus 4 plus 3 at a minimum, 11 years after they finished high school, and we're telling them, now come back to the Masjid Imam Barga. They're like, I don't have time for that. Dad, Mom, these are fairy tales. What are you talking about? And in that reality, that's what burns my heart. And that's what breaks my heart. Because we have one of the richest forms of belief that hasn't been shared. I'm here, every time I go to Seattle or West Coast or other parts of, people are like, why are you here? If you crunch the numbers on how much money economically, iqtisad, in terms of monetarily, I lose by sitting here, you'd be astonished. You'd be like, what is wrong with you? But I'm not looking at it just from one lens. I'm looking at it from another lens. And that is where I'm trying to convey that to you and I, so we understand that gift of the love of the Ahlul Bayt and how valuable that is. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I believe in my heart of hearts that is the most precious gift. But that gift needs to be cherished and it needs to be conveyed. If it's not cherished and conveyed in the right way, it's called kufran ni'mat in some sense. There's something where you're accepting of a gift of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's sometimes that you don't appreciate the gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you. And Allah says very clearly, وَلَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَئِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. That if you are grateful, we'll increase it. And if you don't, the answer is in front of you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarifies. So this gift of the love of the Ahlul Bayt is a tremendous gift. But it needs to be understood in context and it needs to be channeled so we can live it. Next part of my story, and I'll end. By the way, my story, please don't look at it as my story. I'm saying this as in everyone has a story around this. I'm giving you as a reference point. On top of that, I have two uncles of mine, my mom's brothers, who are doctors, engineers, both of them, and entrepreneurs, influential members of society, who were target killed in Pakistan. You know, like target killings, they used to look at people's names and all of these things. Many of the intelligentsia were target killed. And so imagine you're a young kid growing up and you're trying to reconcile, why was this person killed? Because they loved the Ahlul Bayt, because they were Shia, they had a name like Dr. this or Dr. that, or this influential member of society. If you don't have a faith-based compass, you're like, why do I want to deal with this? On one side, the belief is not giving me the answers that I need. Number two, it's also a risk to my life. I'm not saying that's reality. I'm just saying to think about it from a different perspective. I'm going to unpack in the next few nights all the answers, inshallah, as much as possible to some of these questions. But if you look at the lens of Sayyid al-Shuhada, from the dynamic of understanding the balance between aql and ishq, you will get a much richer understanding. Aql is something we need to define. Kamal is something we need to define, which we'll define. Ishq of Allah, ishq haqiqi, that is the true love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is what the journey of Ahlul Bayt and Imam Hussain teaches us. But if you look at it solely from the material realm, you won't fully understand it. And by the way, the answer to all of these difficulties lies in the door of Allah through the door of the Ahlul Bayt. And I'll give you evidence tonight. Even that economic matter, they sort it out for you, believe me. But you have to have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll leave others for the next day. But remember, that love, that spark, the Ahlul Bayt tell us, إِنَّ لِقَتْلِ الْحُسَيْنِ حَرَارَةً فِي قُلُوبِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ لَا تَبْرُدْ أَبَدًا. That for the love of Hussein, there is a burning flame in your heart, and it never extinguishes for the believers. Make sure that that flame is burning high at all times, and revive it and cradle it and allow it to grow for the next generation. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You have to understand the lenses of life. If I look at something with one lens, I'll see one thing. There's some things in Canada culturally that are different in parts of America culturally. There are some things that are accepted here that are not accepted there. There's some things that are accepted there that are not accepted here. There's some things in the United Kingdom that are different. When I went to the UK the first time, as an American, we're very loud. We're very marketing oriented. That's how the world perceives us. When you grow up in America and you don't travel outside of America, you think the whole world revolves around America. When you realize, you get a rude awakening. I was in Australia last year, and the world has definitely moved on from America, that's for sure. But if you're in the bubble of America, you don't realize these things. And so sometimes you have to understand the lay of the land. So in the UK, I had to understand something called decorum. You have this concept of decorum in America. Decorum, you have to have some elegance, the way you say things. We're just like shoot from the hip cowboys. And so the same way, from the dynamics of the other side of the equation, if you came to America, the concept of reserve. We're like, the first time I went to the UK, they're like, you Americans. I was like, what do you mean us Americans? They're like, you guys you're all liars. I was like, what do you mean all liars? So you know how to sell anything. You could sell someone like anything. We're like, well, okay. What about you guys? No, we tell people their technical features of a product. We tell them the reality. We tell them as it is. And then an American would respond, perhaps, that's why you don't sell anything. And the reality is, you have to know the dynamics of society, and you have to know the culture in which you exist. So if you look at the Sayyid al-Shuhada Aza, if you look at Islam, if you look at the Ahlul Bayt, if you look at the Quran, if you look at all of this from one lens, which is only the lens of this world, you may not get the whole picture. I'm giving you all the answers in a few lines of poetry, and we'll open up this and we'll unpack it the next day. Mujhko duniya mein koi shakhs bhi aisa na mila. Mujhko duniya mein koi shakhs bhi aisa na mila jo ye keh sakta ho shabbir se manga na mila. कहाँ पढ़ा हूँ मैं? दुरूद भेजो मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद. कब्रिस्तान में कहाँ हैं हम लोग? बेदार है. दुरूद भेजो मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद. मुझको दुनिया में कोई शख्स भी ऐसा न मिला जो ये कह सकता हो शब्बीर से मांगा न मिला. और एक बार उनकी सखावत के मुताबिक मांगे, एक बार उनकी सखावत के मुताबिक मांगे, ऐसा मौला को कोई मांगने वाला न मिला. एक बार उनकी सखावत के मुताबिक मांगे, ऐसा मौला को कोई मांगने वाला न मिला. और कम से कम जान है कीमत, ये समझ कर आना. कम से कम जान है कीमत ये समझ कर आना, इश्क शब्बीर किसी को कभी सस्ता ना मिला। कम से कम जान है कीमत ये समझ कर आना, इश्क शब्बीर किसी को कभी सस्ता ना मिला. The poet saying here that know that the minimum price of admission is your life here when it comes to the love of Sayyid al-Shuhada. No one's ever gotten on discount. The idea is that this is a love that connects you to Abu Abdullah, that connects you to Imam Ali, that connects you to Rasulullah. And that for that you have to give the price of Maytham. You have to give the price of the likes of those who gave their life. That's not something that comes even. But if you look at it from one lens, you won't get the picture. You have to look at it from another perspective, another lens, to understand the depth that is therein, the value that is in therein, the power that is in therein. This is one aspect of understanding how precious, how valuable this is. Just to bring this point home, if you look at the lens of Karbala, and I'll build on this inshallah tomorrow. If you look at this, the lens of Karbala, when it comes to the dynamic of aql and ishq, that is aql, reason, and ishq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you look at the whole tragedy of Karbala from the lens of aql, it doesn't make sense. What makes sense about the journey of Karbala? Maybe you may find one or two things. But if you wear the lens of ishq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ishq haqiqi, divine love, divine passion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's nothing like it. There's a poet who he's considered, I mean, poets are secular religion, whatever they are. He's not considered known as someone who is known for their poetry of Ahlul Bayt, but he wrote this and he said, I wrote this in honor of Imam Hussein. I was inspired by Imam Hussein's movement. And the poet's name is Ahmad Faraz. And he says a line, he says, Harf-e taza ki tarah. I'll translate inshallah. Harf-e taza ki tarah, qissa-e parina kahun. Harf-e taza ki tarah, qissa-e parina kahun. कल की तारीख को मैं आज का आईना कहूँ, कल की तारीख को मैं आज का आईना कहूँ, और इश्क की राह में जो कोह गरां आता है, इश्क की राह में जो कोह गरां आता है, लोग दीवार कहें मैं तो इसे जीना कहूँ. Ishq ki raah mein, the poet is saying that I can put a mirror between yesterday and today. What's going on then is still going on today, in essence. And he says that obstacle that comes in the path of divine love, that obstacle that comes in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love, people call it an iron mountain. I call it a ladder, a staircase to the divine. How you look at things matters. When you and I look at the trials and tribulations of Sayyid al-Shuhada, you know what's amazing about it? One of the most amazing aspects is, as the day of Ashura is progressing, as the battle is culminating, as things are getting more and more difficult, the itminan of Sayyid al-Shuhada is increasing. Allahu Akbar. You would think anyone else would get demoralized. It's not for any reason that the second time when this verse, it's ta'wil. You know, there's tafsir of an ayah and there's ta'wil. Tafsir is often zahir elements. Ta'wil is batin. In the ta'wil of Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna, nafse mutma'inna, in its ta'wil is Imam Hussein alayhi salam. That is understanding that how engrossed and how in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala someone can be. This is how you understand the dynamics of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Live Karbala as a philosophy of life. It will solve all your problems. How? We'll explain the next few nights. We turn our hearts and our minds to Karbala and the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Tonight and the next few nights, this is the Arbaeen nights of Sayyid al-Shuhada, and we'll commemorate Sayyid al-Shuhada as well as the tragedy from Karbala to Kufa and Sham, and back to Karbala and back to Medina. You know, it's been 1400 years, but the movement of Sayyid al-Shuhada, it's evergreen. It's evergreen because it's a movement of humanity. It's a movement of truth. It's a movement of justice in every era and every time. That love that you and I have for Sayyid al-Shuhada needs to be kindled. Why? People ask, why do you cry? Why do you mourn? I would argue that maybe the world needs to cry more. You know, when a baby comes into the world, when it's cradled into the arms, the doctor or the nurses, whoever brings the child there, they're trying to get the child to cry. Why? Because that shows a sign of life. They want to see the child is alive. In our world, many people may be breathing, but spiritually they may be dead. Otherwise, why would we see innocent people being killed? In the Middle East, in Pakistan, Parachinar, in Lebanon, wherever that's happening, wherever innocent people are being killed, our spirits as a global society may be dead. Karbala reminds us of our humanity. Ajrukum ala Allah. Imam al-Hussein's journey reminds us This movement is a humanitarian movement first, a movement to give people their bare minimum rights. Otherwise, how does someone give water in the heat of the desert? How does one give water to the enemy? How does someone give water to the animals of the enemy? اجرکم علی اللہ. These are the nights of the Ahlul Bayt. عزادارو دو جملے مصائب کے سن لیجئے, یہی اشک کام آئیں گے, پتہ نہیں کون رہے گا اگلے سال یا نہیں رہے گا. عزادارو یہ ایام منسوب ہیں آل محمد سے اور بیبیاں سے, خاص طور سے ایک 4 سالہ معصوم سکینہ. ابھی آپ نے مصائب میں اور مرثیے میں سنا, یہ بی وہ بی ہیں جو امام حسین علیہ السلام نے اپنے نماز شب میں, اپنے صلاۃ اللیل میں دعا کیا خداوند متعال سے. وہ امام جس نے ہمیں دعائے عرفہ تعلیم فرمائی, وہ کہہ رہا ہے خداوندہ مجھے ایک راحت جہاں, ایک تسکین جگر, ایک بیٹی عطا کر جس کا نام امام نے سکینہ رکھا. وہ بی بی جو کربلا سے کوفہ و شام تلک وہ مصائب بی بی نے سہے کہ شاید بیان بھی نہ کر پاؤں میں یا کوئی بھی بیان نہ کر پائے. امام سجاد سے منسوب ہے کہ ہمارے شیعوں کو بتا دو کہ جو ہمارے حقیقی مصائب ہیں اگر وہ سن لیں برداشت نہ کر پائیں, یہ انتہا ہیں آل محمد کے مصائب کے. آج پرسہ دیجئے بی بی فاطمہ الزہرا کو, پرسہ دیجئے امام زمانہ کو, اور پرسہ دیجئے حسین غریب کو, ان کی 4 سالہ معصوم سکینہ کا. کہتے ہیں کہ ایک منظر یہ آیا کہ جب بازار میں اور بازار کے بعد جب دربار میں بیبیاں بلائی گئی, ایک مرحلہ یہ آیا کہ یزید مخاطب ہوا اس 4 سالہ معصوم سکینہ سے اور کہا کہ تمہارا نام کیا ہے؟ بی بی نے جواب دیا سکینہ بنت الحسین, سکینہ بنت الحسین. وہ سمجھ گیا, کہا تمہارا بابا تمہیں بہت چاہتا تھا. بی بی نے کہا جی ہمارے بابا بہت چاہتے تھے, ہاں ہاں ہمارے بابا ہمیں بہت چاہتے تھے, اگر یہاں نظر آئیں تو پہچان پاؤ گی. کیسا ہو سکتا ہے کہ نہ پہچان پاؤں؟ میرے بابا, میں ان کے سینے پہ سوتی تھی. میرے بابا کہتے ہیں کہ اس ملعون نے تشت طلا میں سر حسین بی بی کے سامنے رکھا. بی بی نے دیکھا, کہا ہے بابا ہماری محبت کا امتحان لیا جا رہا ہے. اے بابا اپنے سکینہ کے پاس آ جائیے. سر حسین دامن آغوش سکینہ میں آیا, مگر بی بی کے دل پہ کیا گزری ہوگی. کہا بابا جب آپ گئے تھے تو آپ کی یہ حالت نہ تھی. اے بابا آپ کے ہونٹ اتنے خشک ہیں آپ کو پانی نہیں ملا. اے بابا جب آپ گئے تھے تو آپ کی رگیں کٹی ہوئی نہیں تھی, یہ آپ کی رگیں کس نے کاٹ دی. اے بابا آپ کے دندان مبارک یہ کس نے توڑ دیے. بابا یہ خاک آپ کے سر پر, انہوں نے آپ کی حالت کیا کر. الا لعنت اللہ علی القوم وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله, صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين, صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين, صلى الله عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. معتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين.
Ya Hussein.
اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر زخم دل کے دکھاؤں میں کیسے زخم دل کے دکھاؤں میں کیسے تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر والا لاش اکبر پہ شاہ جب پہنچے دل کو ہاتھوں سے تھام کر بولے تیری فرقت میں علی اکبر آگ دل میں میرے لگا دی ہے آگ دل کی بجھاؤں میں کیسے آگ دل کی بجھاؤں میں کیسے تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر تو ہے کریل جوان اے بیٹا باپ تیرا ضعیف ہے کتنا نور آنکھوں کا ہو گیا رخصت مجھ کو آتا نہیں نظر خیمہ لے کے خیموں میں جاؤں میں کیسے لے کے خیموں میں جاؤں میں کیسے تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر جس نے 18 سال پالا تھا کیسے دیکھے کہ وہ تیرا لاشا تیری شادی کا تھا جسے ارماں کیسے دیکھے کہ وہ تیرا لاشا تیری ماں کو بتاؤں میں کیسے تیری ماں کو بتاؤں میں کیسے لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر سحر اکبر اکبر میرا سحر بھائی بہنوں کا ہے عجب رشتہ جس کا ثانی کہیں نہیں ملتا رو کے سگرا نے یہ لکھا اکبر ایک دکھیا کی لاج رکھ لینا مر گیا تو بتاؤں میں کیسے مر گیا تو بتاؤں میں کیسے تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر لطف جینے میں اب کہاں اکبر دل سے اٹھتی ہے یہ فغاں اکبر صبح عاشور دی تھی جو تو نے خون رلائے کہ وہ اذان اکبر تیری صورت بلاؤں میں کیسے تیری صورت بلاؤں میں کیسے تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین
یا حسین اے نانا تیری امت سے تیرا دین بچا کر لائی ہے، تیری بے گھر زینب آئی ہے۔ اے نانا تیری امت سے تیرا دین بچا کر لائی ہے، تیری بے گھر زینب آئی ہے، تیری بے گھر زینب آئی ہے، او تیری بے گھر زینب آئی ہے، بے چادر زینب آئی ہے، تیرا دین بچا کر لائی ہے۔ اے نانا تیری امت سے تیرا دین بچا کر لائی ہے، تیری بے گھر پوچھا جو کسی نے زینب سے بھائی ہے کہاں، تو زینب نے پوچھا جو کسی نے زینب سے بھائی ہے کہاں، تو زینب نے ایک مٹھی خاک اٹھائی ہے، ایک مٹھی خاک اٹھائی ہے، اور خاک ہوا میں اڑائی ہے، تیری بے گھر زینب آئی ہے۔ اے نانا تیری امت سے تیرا دین بچا کر تیری بے گھر زینب آئی ہے۔ قرآن جو تھا شبیر کا سر مقتل میں سموں سے روندا گیا، قرآن جو تھا شبیر کا سر مقتل میں سموں سے روندا گیا، جزدان جو تھا تن کا کڑتا، جزدان جو تھا تن کا کڑتا، وہ خون میں ڈوبا لائی ہے، تیری بے گھر زینب آئی ہے۔ اے نانا تیری امت سے تیرا دین بچا کر لائی ہے، تیری بے گھر زینب آئی ہے۔ مقتل میں لگی تھی قیمت دی، بولی دیتے تھے دشمن دی، مقتل میں لگی تھی قیمت دی، بولی دیتے تھے دشمن دی، اے نانا میں نے قیمت دی، او نانا میں نے قیمت دی، اپنی چادر سے چکائی ہے، تیری بے گھر زینب آئی ہے۔ اے نانا تیری امت سے تیرا دین بچا کر لائی ہے، تیری بے گھر تھا جس نے سوار کرایا جب زینب کی سواری نکلی تھی، تھا جس نے سوار کرایا جب زینب کی سواری نکلی تھی، اے شہر مدینہ کہاں ہے وہ، اے شہر مدینہ کہاں ہے وہ، زینب کی سواری آئی ہے، تیرا دین بچا کر لائی ہے۔ اے نانا تیری امت سے تیرا دین بچا کر لائی ہے، تیری بے گھر زینب اس چادر کی ہی حرمت سے کعبے کا بنے گا غلاف نوید، اس چادر کی ہی حرمت سے کعبے کا بنے گا غلاف نوید، بھائی پر سے صدقہ کر کے، بھائی پر سے صدقہ کر کے، جو چادر زینب لائی ہے، تیرا دین بچا کر لائی ہے۔ اے نانا تیری امت سے تیرا دین بچا کر لائی ہے، تیری بے گھر زینب آئی ہے۔ یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین
Hussein, Hussein, Ya Hussein,
جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، 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 سر زندہ کی دیواروں سے ٹکراتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، اے بالکھ دربار یزیدی میں بھلا کیسے میں جاؤں، دربار یزیدی میں بھلا کیسے میں جاؤں، اے بال کھلے شرم و حیا کی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، اے کون میرے پاس جیوں کس کے سہارے، اے کون پاس جیوں کس کے سہارے، تنہائی میری موت بنی جاتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، کانوں سے ٹپکتا ہے لہو شانوں پہ دیکھو، کانوں سے ٹپکتا ہے لہو شانوں پہ دیکھو، ظالم کی اذیت مجھے تڑپاتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، جب تک تیرے سینے سے نہ لگ جائے سکینہ، جب تک تیرے سینے سے نہ لگ جائے سکینہ، زندہ میں اسے نیند کہاں آتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، جلتے ہوئے خیام کا منظر ہے نظر میں، جلتے ہوئے خیام کا منظر میں نظر میں، وہ رات نگاہوں سے کہاں جاتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، دربار یزیدی میں بھلا کیسے میں جاؤں، دربار یزیدی میں بھلا کیسے میں جاؤں، ہے بال کھلے شرم و حیا آتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، صلوات و سلام آپ پر فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پر فاطمہ زہرا، ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پر فاطمہ زہرا، ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا، کانوں سے سکینہ کے اتارے گئے گوہر، کانوں سے سکینہ کے اتارے گئے گوہر، زینب کی بچھینی ہے ردا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پر فاطمہ زہرا، ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا، اے رب جہاں پنجتن پاک کا صدقہ اس قوم کا دامن غم شبیر سے بھر دے، بچوں کو عطا کر علی اصغر کا تبسم، بوڑھوں کو حبیب ابن مظاہر کی نظر دے، ماؤں کو سکھا ثانی زہرا کا سلیقہ، بہنوں کو سکینہ کی دعاؤں کا اثر دے، بچوں کو عطا کر ولولہ اون محمد، ہر ایک جوان کو علی اکبر کا جگر دے، اے رب جہاں تجھے سجاد کا صدقہ، بیمار جو ہے ان کو شفا یاب تو کر دے، اور جو چادر زینب کی عزادار ہیں مولا، محفوظ رہیں ایسی خواتین کے پردے، مولا تجھے زینب کی اسیری کی قسم ہے، بے جرم اسیروں کو رہائی کی خبر دے، غم کوئی نہ دے ہم کو سوائے غم شبیر، شبیر کا غم بانٹ رہا ہے تو ادھر دے، بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات